Okay, good afternoon everyone. Congratulations to making it through to after afternoon tea, well done. This is the final session of the day and we're going to be talking about litter and all the nasties that go with it. It always amazes me because litter it's part of the waste, and to a lot of the community litter is associated as the main waste issue, which of course it isn't. But it's really, really important because it's all about the environment, it's about the amenity of the places we live and so on. I was fortunate enough to have lived in Singapore for 4 years, and they have an amazing solution to litter. If you get caught, it's $500 on the spot. End of story. And guess what? There's no litter. Could we do something like that in Australia? I often wonder. However, you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to 4 experts on litter and what it's all about. Our first speaker, Brodie Smith, is going to talk about cleaning up in the muddy kerbs and all the problems associated with muds and the people that live there. We'll hold questions to the very end, but please make a note and keep them sharp. Thank you very much. Brodie, over to you.
Hello everyone. I'll just move that a bit. My name's Brodie. I am from the City of Canterbury, Bankstown in Sydney, and today I will be talking to you about our holistic approach to tackling illegal dumping around our apartment blocks. My clicker's not... Okay, that way. Dumping. We have heaps and heaps and heaps of it. I really love a pun, so you'll notice that's a running theme. We are a large council with close to 400,000 residents. Each year, our residents dispose of over 14,000 tonnes of bulky waste through our clean-up system, but are also exposed to 1,400 tonnes of illegal dumping abandoned in our streets. We have limited greenfield developments, so as our population grows, we have an increasing number of muds. This higher density results in more curbside dumping as more people are within a smaller space producing more stuff with nowhere to put it. They simply don't have backyard sheds. To tackle illegal dumping, we have utilised our 4-pillar approach from our recently adopted Clean City Strategic Plan. These pillars involve data collection and analysis, infrastructure and services, education and engagement, and enforcement. The 4 pillars all need to work together to build a clean street. They are equally important, and if one is missing, everything falls down. I will start with our first pillar, data collection. Firstly, we needed to know where our hotspots were. These corresponded with areas of high density along our train corridor and are often higher than average disadvantaged. Secondly, we needed to know who was looking after these buildings. We have built a database of over 350 strata managers, building managers, and 400 rental agents that operate within our LGA. We are hopeful with the further development of Strata Hub, we'll be able to contact some of our managers that have been harder to reach. Thirdly, we needed to know which buildings were booking their cleanups, or in a lot of cases, not booking their cleanups. Small unit blocks within our city are allowed 4 cleanups a year, while our larger blocks over 50 units are entitled to 6 cleanups. A recent examination of our booking system found that in our hotspots, apartment blocks, 20 to 30% of apartment blocks were not booking in all their cleanups, and in many cases had not booked in a single cleanup for several months or even years. Our Clean City officers have begun a program of intensive engagement with building and strata managers and estate agents to increase the use of these cleanup allocations while moving to enforcement activities for those residents that are found to continue to dump on the curbside while their cleanup allocation goes unused. Our second pillar is infrastructure and services. Following on from the data showing that our hotspots are in areas of higher than average disadvantage. Many of the buildings in our dumping hotspots are ageing, poorly maintained, and simply do not have adequate waste infrastructure. To help with this, we have engaged a strata lawyer to develop an educational guide on how to submit a DA for an apartment block. This will allow them to do improvements to their common property with the goal of improving bin bays, infrastructure across our muds, and getting the bins off the street. In addition to improving the infrastructure, we are also focused on improving our services. We're further developing our online booking system to allow our strata managers to book online instead of phoning in. Currently, our strata managers have to call into our council and speak to customer service to arrange their cleanups, and many of them have flagged with us that this is a significant barrier to them utilising their full allocation. We are hoping that with further development, we will be able to allow them to easily book all of their cleanups with just a press of a button. Continuing with infrastructure and services, we have worked on site in a Department of Housing estate in Riverwood to move waste off the curb and onto on-site collection points. You can see the on-site collection point in that image on the far side, marked in yellow paint with "Put your clean up here." We have made it as simple as possible for people to do the right thing. We have also improved access for our collection staff to the bins by providing new curbside ramps, meaning that bins aren't left in the gutter following collection, and this has also increased safety for both our staff and the cleaning staff that maintain the estate. Following extensive engagement with the tenancy managers, we have successfully coordinated the cleaning and maintenance to occur following the cleanups. This means that the curb can be mown, not mown around the dump, and over time we have seen all the grass grow back. And while that might seem like a small win, it has made a significant difference to the estate. We've continued to work with our community housing providers very intensely throughout this process, and the collaboration with them is very important in our success. The Riverwood estate has been an identified hotspot for many years, and during the past year we have built a strong partnership with social housing providers operating in the area to implement new approaches to the bulky waste. The coordination of the mowing and cleaning that I talked about earlier results in a new clean period. Initially, this clean period following the scheduled cleanup and the mowing and the cleaning only lasted about a week. But a year later, we're up to about 4 weeks where we do not have any illegal dumping occurring in the estate, and this is a result we could barely have dreamed of happening previously. A really interesting learning from the education side of this program was that giving the residents all of the dates for the cleanups in advance dramatically reduced the amount of dumping that happened curbside. Initially, we were really wary about giving all the residents all the dates, as this we thought would lead to commercial dumping in the estate, as it is a known hotspot to get rid of things that you don't want. However, we found this wasn't the case. In all the sites that had all of the dates, there was a significant decrease in dumping, both prior and following the collections. Our education has also been widely spread. Our earlier phases of our Eyes On It campaign focused on social norming that dumping is wrong, and having plastered the community with "dumping is illegal, you will be fined" messaging, we have moved on to a second phase of encouraging residents to do the right thing. In August 2022, Council launched a year-long media campaign to encourage residents, strata and building managers, and real estate agents working in and around unit blocks to book their bulky waste cleanups. The campaign encourages users to present their items regularly and correctly. Doing this will help reduce illegal dumping in and around apartment blocks and improve the safety of poorly presented cleanups. Our Clean City illegal dumping officers are on the ground visiting hotspots, helping both MUDs and SUDs book in their cleanups, tagging illegal dumping as legally presented, as well as undertaking enforcement activities. Using the data that we have gathered on who our strata managers are, we are now able to directly engage them. We have a database of over 350 strata managers and building managers who have subscribed to a regular newsletter in which we provide information and resources to assist them in managing their waste, as well as constant reminders to book in their cleanups. We have engaged a strata lawyer on behalf of our community to develop template bylaws for the on-site management of waste. This is important as we have limited powers of enforcement within the private property and are often finding that cleaners and caretakers are moving dumping from within the private on-site onto the curb in an effort to keep their common property clear and effort to keep things tidy for them while making a mess for us. The majority of our strata managers' information comes from our cleanup booking site. However, our rental managers' data is purchased from Domain as part of a data sharing agreement. I think it's very important that I clarify here that the data that we purchase from Domain gives us the rental listings in our area and the listing agent. It does not give us the email address of the listing agent, but luckily for me, real estate agents like to put their email addresses on their websites. So with a little bit of Google and a little bit of time sitting there matching data, I now have the email addresses for almost all 400 of our real estate agents, as well as their names and phone numbers. They can't hide from me now. Our third pillar of our Clean City strategic plan is enforcement. Following our education, we have put up cameras covering our hotspot areas to catch people dumping. We have then used these images in media releases, these exact images, to promote that we are cracking down on dumpers. This image is one of our more brazen dumps, unloading a car in the middle of a pretty densely populated street in the middle of the day. This man is not only perfectly in front of this camera, but only a few metres away from 3 very large anti-illegal dumping "you will be caught" posters. He was fined $2,000 and was not very happy about it, but I don't think he'll be dumping in our LGA again. So what impact has this had as a holistic approach in improving our curbsides? Dumping is down. We have had huge successes with our program in social housing properties, and it's still significantly decreased dumping across our privately owned MUDs. We've seen a massive 80 and 90% reductions of dumping outside our social housing areas in Riverwood and Villawood, and dumping has halved in 2 of our hotspots. All of this has exceeded our goals. One hotspot, however, has been slower, with still a positive result, but a reduction of only 16%. This is interesting, so I'm going to go into why we think this might have happened. The Riverwood estate and the McDonald block in Lakemba are similar in land size, but have had very different results in our program. And we attribute this to the different number of managers we needed to engage. The housing estates have a single manager, there's one person to engage, whereas the Lakemba hotspot has over 500 different strata managers and building managers booking cleanups at different times with different frequencies, sometimes not at all, and is very difficult to engage them and form a cohesive education plan. There is also a difference in the residents that live in these 2 locations. The residents of our Riverwood estate have lived there for a very long time and have formed a very strong social cohesion around similar experiences with the Department of Housing. However, our residents in our McDonald block are predominantly migrants that have freshly arrived in Australia, speaking many languages with many different backgrounds and experiences. So how are we going to work with Lakemba to try and engage them when they're such a difficult community? We've noticed that small actions had big impacts within the Riverwood estate. Simply the act of putting up the posters and the signs and being there in uniform had a really positive impact on the estate. In our Villawood estate, our dumping officer has fondly been nicknamed Council Lady, and Council Lady is yelled at from across the road when she arrives in the area. These groups responded positively to knowing that someone cared about where they lived and was trying to make it a nicer place. Our simple act of trying uplifted them to try harder themselves. The social cohesions with these, while this area is really cohesive, they get a really strong boost from having someone outside the Department of Housing care about where they live. And it was really nice. They showed a lot of pride when we showed interest and care in where they lived. Building pride in more diverse communities is more difficult, especially when we have low owner-occupiers. To help with this, we have developed a welcome pack for new renters in Lakemba using the rental listing data that I purchased from Domain. We are sending welcome flyers and simple waste guides to new residents to welcome them to our city and sneak in a little bit of waste education on the side. This builds the warms and fuzzies. They know that we care about them and want them to be there, as well as showing that we are the authority and we are the ones that ask about information for their waste should they need help with it. To wrap up with, I will leave you with the best piece of feedback I have ever received from a program, from one of our tenancy managers within our Riverwood estate. The estate is sparkling. And while it sounds dramatic to say sparkling when you're talking about one of our highly disadvantaged Australia's largest social housing complexes, it really is true. As soon as the dumping is gone from the kerbs and the grass has grown back, you'd hardly realise you're in one of Australia's most disadvantaged communities. So it's had made a huge difference. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brodie. Interesting. Showing interest in people always has an impact. It reminds me of a case study I read about years ago where people were experimenting with the lighting in a factory, and they increased the lighting and productivity went up. And then they decreased the lighting and productivity went up. It was the fact that people were interested, the manager was interested, that had the effect. It was really, really illuminating. Our next speaker, we'll save questions to the end. Our next speaker is Zoe White from Byron Shire Council. She's going to talk about a subject that's dear to my heart and a colleague of mine who's sitting there in the middle of the room, saving the fish, one piece of plastic at a time. So Zoe, take the floor. Thank you.
Hello. Thanks everybody for sticking around for the late afternoon session. My name is Zoe. My background is actually in marine science and management, hence my goal of trying to save the fish one piece of litter at a time. And something that became a really imminent theme throughout my studies was the impacts that waste and marine debris is having on our local environment and our marine organisms. And I thought, I need to do something, and this is something that we can really easily do something about to stop waste from entering into our environment. And hence I've ended up in the role I'm in today, working for Byron Shire Council on litter and illegal dumping prevention. Before I get properly into the presentation, I did want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land in which we meet today, the Gumbaynggirr people. And I'd like to honour the First Nations people and their connection to land, sea and community, and pay my deepest respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and anybody First Nations here in this room today. And I do like to show this image as well to show that I think we've got a really long way to go as a modern day society to get that connection back to country and that care for country that the First Nations people have done really well for thousands and thousands of years before us. I am going to be speaking about our Butt Free Byron Shire campaign Phase 2, what we did for the project, why we did it, what we achieved, and of course some of the many challenges we experienced and what we learned from that. So some of you may be familiar with the original campaign, which was introduced in 2018 in response to the fact that the number one littered items were by far cigarette butts in our shire, but also quite commonly statewide and nationally and globally as well. And I won't speak too much on this campaign because I'm going to let the video in a second do the hard work for me. But we did have a really successful campaign which we did want to build on, but it also identified some challenges that we had in that first campaign that we wanted to continue to work on how we could actually address those issues that we identified. So hence the unique title of Phase 2 of the campaign. And we set ourselves a new goal of trying to reduce not only cigarette butt litter, but all litter by a total of 40% by the end of the project. And one of those things that we did highlight in that first project is that we connected really well with our community, and we had some good responses there in terms of behaviour change, but our resident base is tiny compared to the amount of visitors that come to our area. So 35,000 residents versus 2.5 million visitors is a pretty big difference. And if we're not connecting with those people and we're not getting the messaging through to them, then we're not going to see really big results. And we still were seeing really big increases in litter in those peak holiday periods when people are coming to visit the region. So we needed to find a way to connect with those people and get the messaging across, which is why we worked on this campaign, and we tried to really connect with why people were coming to the area. And for most people, that is because of the unique natural beauty of the area. The Cape Byron Marine Park is incredible, and there's actually recent statistics that 85% of our visitors are coming to the area for that. So if you're coming for that, then we need to work to protect it. So hence I'll let the video take over, which is part of our campaign that we developed to try and educate that messaging.
Jingiwala, welcome to Araku country. While you're visiting Byron, please look after country and respect country.
The Cape Byron Marine Park is home to an incredibly rich diversity of marine life. From sea turtles and birds to manta rays, leopard sharks, bottlenose dolphins and migrating humpback whales. There's over 500 species of fish. Even critically endangered species, including the grey nurse shark, can be found enjoying the beautiful waters of Byron. Unfortunately, all these incredible marine animals are threatened by impacts of plastic debris. When littered plastic items, including plastic bottle tops, cigarette butts, and plastic bags enter the ocean, they don't just magically go away. Instead, they break up into smaller and smaller pieces, not even visible to the naked eye. So these particles transfer pollutants and potentially harmful chemicals into organisms and ecosystems, which can cause severe harm or even death to marine life. Plastic is commonly found in birds, fish, turtles, whales, and other marine creatures. Even in us humans. Pretty crazy to think that microplastics are found in drinking water, salt, and even beer. So, where is all this plastic coming from? Well, you guessed it, us humans. Approximately 80% of all marine debris starts its course from land-based sources, entering into local rivers and eventually into the ocean. I know all this sounds really negative, but there is a positive because we can all reduce our litter by not littering.
Here in the Byron Shire, we are dedicated about reducing the amount of litter, and we've been doing this through running our Butt-Free Byron Shire campaign since 2018. We use an integrated approach to reduce not only cigarette butt litter, but all of the litter in our shire. Together with our incredible partners, we want to encourage the community and all of our visitors to do the right thing and dispose of their rubbish correctly. So far, we've picked up over 10,000 pieces of litter during our data collection. We've installed 123 EnviroPoles, which are our special cigarette butt bins. We've held several large educational events, and we've actually banned smoking on Byron's beaches to help deter littering. So what can you do to help us keep the Byron Shire clean and protect our local environment? Firstly, put your rubbish in the bin. We have over 419 bins to make this really nice and easy. And if you're going somewhere like into the hinterlands where there isn't a bin, think about bringing that waste out and take out what you take in. It all leads back to the ocean. Did you know that it's actually now illegal to smoke on Byron's beaches? This is being enforced and can incur up to a $110 fine or up to $250 if you're caught littering. And if you're smoking, make sure that you put your cigarette butt in one of our special butt bins. Limit your plastic use. There are so many items that we can easily switch over to reusables. For instance, reusable coffee cup. And if you see litter, pick it up and put it in the bin. We can all play our part.
Local or a visitor to our country, pick up your rubbish, put it in the bin and look after country. That's how we respect our country here in the Byron Shire.
Thank you. I'm very pleased that actually worked, so that's exciting news. We wanted to use that as a way that we could really demonstrate, first of all, the incredible things that we have in the area, give them a reason to do the right thing, but also give them the call to actions at the end there, so they know the takeaway messages. And this is something that throughout the campaign, we continue to have it as an educational tool available to anybody to use as well. But it was distributed at some of our local pubs, and it would just be in those areas where there'd be a TV in the background somewhere, so that hopefully it would capture people's attentions and then they'd start looking into it. And then also places like our visitor centre, and the project was actually undertaken during the lovely time of the lockdowns. So there was a lot of online engagement and using those online platforms where people might be planning their trips to the area as a way to get that messaging through as well as at our local cinema at events, and our local university, Southern Cross University, now use it as an educational resource as well. So that was one part of what we did throughout the project. Why did we choose to use videos? And I've got another one to show you in a moment. We were pretty limited with what we could do during that time period because obviously events and a lot of the normal sort of engagement activities weren't possible. So we had to refocus and look at how else we can engage and educate our audience, and a visual way was a really good way to do this. One thing I wanted to highlight as well is that we did have a complete shift in our tourism demographic from the moment that we applied for the grant and the funding, which both projects were funded by New South Wales EPA as well. So we had to shift the messaging to really focus in on what was an international demographic to what we consider the Byron Bay or the influencer type style, and try and connect with them. So hence we tried to create a video resource which had the same messaging but getting that through in 30 seconds, making it something that was really memorable, capturing people's attention, and we sort of went for an approach that looked like a tourism type video, so that people were actually going to watch in and take in that messaging rather than going, oh, it's just somebody telling me off for littering or something like that. So we went Instagram versus reality approach, and we wanted it to be somewhere where our visitors were likely to frequent as well. So it went in the Ballina Airport or the Byron Gateway, in the arrival lounge where people would be waiting for their baggage, and there's huge screens in the background. So it's a good way to get attention to that. It wasn't used much further than that because there was sort of a disagreement whether that aligns with the don't be a tosser messaging or not. So I'd be really interested in anybody's feedback afterwards. If you want to come and see me, positive, negative, anything would be great, because what we also missed during that pandemic time, we weren't actually able to undertake surveys and measure whether that messaging was effective or not. So we're lacking that information, unfortunately. So I'll let the video take over. So that was our advertisement, pretty bold and different messaging, because we were really trying to find a way, as I mentioned, to capture attention, and what we were trying to do is show a juxtaposition between what people are actually coming here and to enjoy versus what that's going to look like if we keep going on the same pathway and disrespecting the environment and continuing to litter. So obviously don't want to be catching sushi, soy fish instead of fish in the river, and we don't want our kids playing with all of the debris that's left on the beaches either. So that was one part of the project, but as Brodie's mentioned, an integrated approach is always required in these prevention projects to achieve successful outcomes. So whilst we did have a big focus on education and awareness, we still undertook regular enforcement in our key sort of peak areas where visitors would be frequenting, and in those peak summer periods as well. Also updated our infrastructure where it was needed. So as you saw in the video, we've banned smoking on Byron's beaches, but we updated the signage and expanded that so that we could then go and enforce in a bigger area as well as moving some of our butt bins around to areas where they were more needed, and updating some of our signage like our town banners or the ground adhesives to direct people directly to the bin so they can't ignore them. And of course we need to monitor our progress and see if we're achieving our targets. So we undertook regular monitoring throughout the whole campaign, and we had 26 different locations where we do the EPA's framework of the local litter checks to monitor how that was going. Some of the other education and engagement that we did throughout the project, we did manage to get a few events in there, but nothing as big as what it would normally be. We were more focused on local markets and a few smaller events. And we did have our local conservation group, Positive Change for Marine Life, undertaking cleans throughout the project and involving people in those as well. And then, of course, all of your standard media engagement, radio interviews, media releases, e-newsletters to try and put out that same messaging, and making sure that all of the areas, so backpackers and different tourist venues throughout Byron, had our materials there, and that messaging was sort of in everybody's faces as they arrive into the area. And also working on some other creative messaging, like our litter journey image, which we worked on with Eco with M, as another unique and creative way to show the impacts the litter can have and how that can actually come back to affect human health as well through what we're consuming. One other part of the project which I think really helped to contribute to some of the successes that we saw in the reduction amount of cigarette butt litter, which was still a big focus for the project. We worked with two of the key local venues and bars in the CBD area, and both of these areas ended up having a smoking area that was set outside, but no butt bins or infrastructure in place, so it was just garden beds absolutely chock-a-block full with cigarette butts. So we worked really closely with the management to obviously make sure that there's infrastructure there that's suitable to the needs, but also that there's education, so having those ground adhesives to direct people, but also importantly working closely with the staff members as well to make sure that they're putting the right messages out there and sending people to where the bins are, and not encouraging them to pop them back into the garden. And in this image here, that big drop in litter that we see isn't actually what we achieved. I wish it was, but that was when the businesses were closed. That's how much litter was present. So before we even started engaging with these businesses, COVID actually gave us this really unique data that could clearly identify where the issue was coming from, and they didn't have much choice but to work with us. So what did we achieve? We did succeed in achieving that 40% reduction, which is really exciting. That image there, we recently received an award from the Keep Australia Beautiful Awards as well, which is exciting, as well as several other achievements. But I would like to note that this data was undertaken during COVID, so we did obviously have less visitors than what we normally would. So unfortunately, yes, we definitely still have issues that we need to address. We haven't completely solved the issue, otherwise I probably wouldn't be here today because I'd be out of a job. I wrote a ridiculously long list of challenges and suggestions, which I regret, but I do want to just focus on a few key take-home messages from what I learnt throughout the project. And it was a really challenging time to work on a project, particularly on a project that was focusing on engagement. And obviously one of the key things was just being adaptable through that whole time period and just being ready to completely shuffle things up to whatever needed to happen. But also something that I think I learnt towards the end there that needed to be done better is, whilst you're shuffling things up, is just communicating really openly if you are doing grant-funded project to your project supervisors as well, so that everybody continues to be on the same page. Another thing that I'm sure that we all learn is just the effectiveness that digital messaging can have, and how helpful it can be to use this alongside face-to-face engagement, which obviously is definitely well needed. And we have a little Instagram up there where we continue to use those platforms to send out our messages as well. One thing which seems to be the opposite of what a lot of people are saying here, I'm actually going to say less data rather than more data. Because I had a ridiculously long data set which was really hard to manage, and if you are time poor, then that can be really challenging. So we've sort of changed our structure a little bit so it is easier to monitor, and then you can spend a lot more time really digging into those trends and evaluating better. And I think as well, one thing that we did sort of do is try to be unique in our messaging, in knowing that we have a coastal community and we needed to try a different way to send the messaging. Still try those unique ways and take a risk. It's definitely worth it. And there were, of course, ongoing things that we realised and learnt throughout the project, and one of those is that whilst all these other types of litter decreased, we then had new issues arise, and obviously with the change in consumer behaviour and not being able to use reusables, we had takeaway litter almost doubling during that time period, and that's led us into the Bring It Back Bruns campaign, which is looking to tackle that issue, and Sarah's in the room here today doing an excellent job at leading that program. Thanks to all of our incredible partners, we couldn't have achieved the outcomes that we have without any of these, and it was a really collaborative project throughout all of the phases. Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. Don't worry, you'll never be out of a job. No, seriously, this stuff needs ongoing messaging. You can't do it and then say, right, done that, let's do something else. It's got to be continual. Well done. So, questions leave to the end, unless someone's got something quick and burning, in which case we'll move on. Our next speaker is Sam Lawson from MRA Consulting, who's going to talk about annual illegal waste survey and the next steps. Sam, it's yours.
Thanks, Ron. Good afternoon, everyone. I look around the room and I see a few people who have maybe been here before, so I'd like to apologise. I did put some different abstracts in today for this conference, but they chose the same one. So this is the third year you're seeing this, but it's updated data, so I'm going to try and make it as interesting as possible for you. Now, I want to get an idea of who's in the room. Can you raise your hand if you're from local government? Whoa. So almost everyone. Who's not from local government? And where are you from? Do you want to just shout out? Waste Group, Consultant, EPA. Okay, great. All right, well, that's really great because this is all about annual illegal waste survey, which is done with our local governments in Victoria. So hopefully you can get some learnings on how to go away and create programs more efficiently and more effectively. I'm going to present the 2021-22 illegal waste survey. But first, we'll go through what the Waste Enforcement Association of Australia is. Then I'll give you the illegal waste snapshot, so the KPIs of the illegal waste world. Some key insights, key industry movements, what's changed this year compared to last year, and then some outcomes and some success stories. So the Waste Enforcement Association of Australia is primarily consists of litter enforcement officers, or whatever you want to call them around Australia. They're authorised officers who investigate and prosecute litter or illegal dumping. But we do also have some community members, property development members, state agencies, managers from different regulatory bodies and different councils. We've grown over the years, so we're sitting at 1,100 members, 1,300 subscribers from 170 organisations. So pretty much anyone who is affected by litter or illegal dumping should probably join the network, because you'll learn a lot from everyone who participates. We have a member-driven vision where we focus on upskilling authorised officers, determining best practice and increasing the state of knowledge, which is what we're doing here today. And more importantly, we encourage strong working relationships between different land managers. So that's bridging the gap between a local government and a regulatory agency, or a local government and charity store, as examples. What we actually do to achieve this vision, we run training courses on a variety of different topics. We do research, the survey here today. We advocate, so from this survey, we gather the needs from all of the officers around Victoria, and we advocate to different agencies for their needs. And we can help people with their strategy, their education, and their enforcement needs. So it's all a lot of words, but this is what we've actually achieved in the last year. So we've engaged 18,000 people in Australia. I won't go through all of them, there's a lot of numbers on the screen, but the most important one really is that we've certified 160 officers through our training courses, and we've assisted even more through free training courses that we offer using scenario-based training. Okay, so the actual annual illegal waste survey. We ask coordinators and authorised officers from local government what challenges they're facing regarding illegal waste, what responses they're taking, how it's affecting the different departments. So this is in terms of education, infrastructure, enforcement, collection and disposal. We ask them about the relationships that they have. So how are they working together? How do they respond to illegal waste? And then we ask them, what are the impacts that they're seeing, apart from the obvious financial one? Are they seeing impacts on environment, community amenity, community safety? So this year we got 54 out of the 79 councils in Victoria. So pretty good. A little bit less than last year, but still pretty good. The snapshot. So we had 268,000 incidents of illegal waste. That's an 8% increase. When you make that incidents per capita, comes down to a 2.5% decrease. But we did have an increase in the total cost across all local governments. So it's 170 million across all local governments, with a cost per incident of $634. So we're seeing incidents per capita decrease, but the cost to respond to those incidents is increasing. That would, I guess, imply that the incidents are becoming more serious. The other snapshot, we talked to officers about their ongoing challenges. So the scope here is, this is authorised officers on the ground responding to the incidents. What are their ongoing challenges? They have a lack of time. Illegal disposal from waste collection or commercial operators. So we're seeing a shift from curbside dumping or residential issues to more commercial operators in Victoria. Although the curbside is still an issue, don't worry. Transient populations, so dealing with renters who have to leave quickly, and obtaining evidence. We asked them about their circuit breakers, so this is, if they could fix one thing that would help them the most, what was that? And it was reducing misuse of council services, so being able to get rid of that curbside illegal dumping so they could respond to the more serious incidents. Educating commercial and building site management teams, increasing their ability to enforce and changing their organisational policies or processes and structures. So for the people who have been here before, unfortunately 2 of those 4 on there have been here the full 3 years, and that's the ability to enforce and the organisational policy, process and structure. So some officers are still coming up against, I guess, a brick wall in their policies. Emerging trends this year were contaminated soil, tyre stockpiling and green waste dumping. And offender profiles were renters moving, building site operators, rogue rubbish collectors and households. So that's the offenders that officers were most typically interacting with. Now I will go through, I guess, the cost and the work involved to respond to litter and illegal dumping in each of the 4 areas of council. I want to preface that for the numbers you're about to see, this is the average cost for a local government in Victoria. So in an average council, you have 4 staff working on education. Their total time towards education for litter and illegal dumping is 0.6 full-time equivalents, so that's increased, and that costs $230,000 per annum. And so this circle over here on the right is telling you how closely the education staff work with other departments in council. So you can see they work very closely with customer service, waste and litter prevention, but less closely with local laws, parks, media and comms, etc. So in Victoria, we've seen an increase in the education and communication activities, which has broadly been because of an increase in community reports. But the response has not necessarily been connected to what the officers are experiencing on the ground. There's a bit of a silo issue happening. Infrastructure. So this is infrastructure related to, or that helps to reduce or prevent illegal waste disposal. The cost of the average council is $165,000, so that's gone up a little bit. Most importantly, we can see that 80% of councils partner to deliver this, so that might be partnering to have some sort of commercial charity bin to collect e-waste or textiles. We saw that 40% of councils actively use CEPTED principles, so that's crime prevention through environmental design. And we've seen an increase in the number using surveillance, so a rapid increase in the number using mobile surveillance. You can see there it's a doubling of mobile cameras and cost put towards mobile surveillance. Okay. Most importantly, I think in the surveillance, it's one of the needs of officers is to use suppliers who can reduce workload. So that's helping the officers go through the hours and hours of data that might be collected and present the snippet of time that is actually important to them when someone dumps. There are services out there that use AI and manual methods as well to send that directly to the officer. Enforcement staff, we have 5 staff, bit of a decrease. And in total, they're spending 0.45 full-time equivalents, and their cost has increased as well. So we're seeing a slight trend towards having more officers spending, an officer spending more time on average, investigating and prosecuting illegal waste. And we can see there that they're starting, compared to the last few years, the enforcement staff are starting to work a little bit more closely with customer service and the parks teams. Importantly, we're seeing a trend where councils integrate enforcement and waste education teams, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. So incidents, slight increase, 3,200 incidents per council. 1,700 incidents were removed by the offender and 1,500 had to be removed by the council. So having the incidents removed by the offender is a great result. This is where councils can see the greatest cost saving because it reduces the cost burden of removing the waste and disposing of the waste. We've also seen an increase in the level of prosecution with 84 infringements and 3 incidents going to the magistrates court per council, remember. This is primarily because we have strengthened provisions in Victoria now using the Environment Protection Act. Barriers to enforcement staff. time, internal processes, ensuring legislative compliance, management attitude, and obtaining evidence. So ensuring legislative compliance is understanding the new act and making sure that their internal processes are aligning with that. And their top concerns when they're out in the field is resident interactions, community perception, and again, having confidence that they're complying with legislation. All right, collection and disposal. 5 staff working on collection and disposal, which is increased by 25%. And combined, they spend 0.6 full-time equivalent. So this is where the biggest cost sits for council, is the collection and disposal, which is why we promote that officers advocate to have the waste removed by the offender. It reduces this cost significantly. So recap in the changes in illegal waste in this survey. Incidents have gone up slightly, cost has gone up slightly, education infrastructure has also gone up, and the emerging trends are contaminated soil, tyre stockpiling, and green waste. I guess the most important thing to jump out here is that we have the new Environment Protection Act, and councils are starting to utilise it. They're eagerly utilising it, with the number of infringements being issued and the increase in referrals to the Magistrates Court. And that's good timing because we're seeing a shift to illegal waste deposit by commercial operators, which is increasing the cost per incident. For those who have been here the last couple of years, we can now, this is the 3rd year of the survey, so we can now start to actually put some long-term trends on the graph. Can anyone point out what I've done wrong with my graphs? I realise I've put the wrong ones on. No? It should be adjusted per capita. So this is the total cost of illegal waste on these graphs. A better way to display it would be having the cost per capita over time, which you'll be able to find in the report when we release it. What would happen then if we had these is the increase would just be slightly less, but the trend in all of these is still an increase over time. So we're seeing an increased cost of illegal waste to council over the 3 years, increased spending on education, increased spending on enforcement, same with collection and disposal, but we've actually seen a decrease in the spending on infrastructure. So the part I wanted to talk to you about was a shift towards more strategic deployment of authorised officers in Victoria. So this is a common internal relationship model we see in councils, where you have enforcement sitting in local laws. The local laws officers would be responsible for investigating a range of different compliance issues. For example, animal control, parking, littering, illegal dumping, you name it, they have to cover it. And a lot of the times, littering or illegal dumping will sit at the bottom of their priority list when they're in this type of role. So we advocate that there is a dedicated position for litter and illegal dumping, and the business case quite easily checks out when you account for the cost savings of having an offender remove the illegal waste they've deposited. But unfortunately, this is still one of the most common relationships we see, where local law sits on their own, education sits on their own. There's very little interaction between the different council departments, and so you have reduced effectiveness to prevention activities. We've seen 3 councils now implement an illegal waste coordinator in Victoria, who essentially acts as a conduit between all of the different departments, and their role is not enforcement or investigation. Their role really is strategic, setting up contracts, making sure all of the different litter and illegal waste services at the council are aligned. And the role, from what we can see, is definitely cost-benefit analysis works out, the business case works out, and you end up reducing the number of enforcement and local laws officers that you need. So we are strong advocates for this type of relationship, so we're really happy to see that councils are starting to put the resources towards that more strategic role. One other thing we've been able to do with the illegal waste survey is produce stronger and more useful investigative tools for officers. So this is a partnership between the association and Tyre Stewardship Australia, where we essentially gather all of the different data sources relating to dumped or stockpiled tyres, and we run a special interest group and a bi-monthly report that allows officers to connect incidents of dumped or stockpiled tyres that might be crossing boundaries, crossing jurisdictions. And that's been really useful down in Victoria. We've been able to connect a number of offenders, and it's really helped with investigations between councils and the Environment Protection Authority. I'm happy to say that we'll be rolling these special interest groups out throughout Australia now with our partnership with Tyre Stewardship Australia. So if you're interested in those, you can sign up at info@wea.com.au. Sorry. And another thing we've been able to do is deliver targeted training days that really work for what the officers need. So we've identified that if an organisation has appropriate enforcement policies, then they're likely to come to us and put their staff through training. But for us to be able to access all of the authorised officers in Victoria, we have to deliver something that allows officers in an organisation that doesn't advocate for their training to still access our training. So what we do here is we work with the regulatory authority, EPA Victoria, and we deliver large-scale training events for all of those officers who are not supported by their organisation to come to training. So we've run 2 of these now. The first one had, I think, 120 people. The second one had 160 people. They work really well, and I advocate that anyone here who has the ability to run such a training course should seek to do so. One point when you're running a course like this is that you need to structure the course a little bit less methodically and be able to deliver the course, I guess, what's the word, where you bounce around? Deliver it in an agile way, because there's lots of different experience in the room, and it's better to be able to use the experience of everyone in the room and start those discussions. So that's it from me. Any questions? And happy to answer them.
We'll save any questions to the end. Thanks, Sam. Our final speaker is Shannon Mead, who's going to talk about the cost of calculating the cost of cigarette butt litter. I've seen a lot of cigarette butts, and as a smoker, an ex-smoker, I confess to being guilty a long time ago. So tell me what I did wrong and what I cost the community.
I'm the enemy standing between you and your costume, so I'll get through this as quickly as I can. So wanted to look at calculating the cost of cigarette butt litter, and I don't necessarily mean the environmental impact. I will touch on that. I mean the actual tangible cost. No More Butts is a registered environmental charity. All of our volunteers, including myself, work in a voluntary capacity, and we work. Oh, actually, I'm answering my own questions in the next slide. This is the main one. So the key message is, I suppose, if you walk away with nothing else, either remember these or take a photo of these. So based off a WWF report around about a year and a half ago, it costs approximately 73 million Australian dollars in just clean-up costs across Australia of cigarette butt litter. So that doesn't talk about anything to do with landfill, doesn't talk about anything, cost of amenity or anything like that, just purely the cost of cleaning up. A willingness to pay study, it was actually, I think, presented at Coffs last year. It costs 119 million. Just on the eastern seaboard is actually what people said they would pay in order to eradicate cigarette butt litter. So that's just the eastern seaboard, what they want to pay to get rid of that and not see cigarette butt litter ever again. Interestingly enough, when you actually talk about cost and who pays, in San Francisco, and I'll go into that, actually it's the smokers that pay. So only those that actually use the product, smokers, are the ones that pay, and they pay now $1.25 per packet, which actually goes into the City of San Francisco Treasury to cover the cost of the cleanups. When we talk about costs, we should look at direct and shared cost, which we'll go through as well. You've got everything from awareness and infrastructure, not just the cost of cleanup that needs to be considered. And then in order to do any of this, you obviously need your baseline data. So as I started to answer my own question before, we are No More Butts. I'm largely the face and the bulk of the work from a policy and an advocacy perspective, but we do have a network of volunteers across Australia and now growing into other territories. We are an accredited observer of the United Nations Environment Programme, and we'll be heading across to Paris for the negotiations for the Plastic Treaty at the end of this month. We are also a member of a few other alliances across Australia and the world. We work with various different councils, predominantly in a pro bono situation, but we also do have financial contracts or consulting as well. And we haven't been speaking about SDGs much this year, but certainly we are definitely connected. And life below water, I think, that resonates certainly to what Zoe's talking about as well. So when we ask who should actually pay for cigarette butt litter and waste, as mentioned, you've got the cost of cleaning up piece. That's the 73.3 million as estimated, and there's the willingness to pay. So at the moment, you've either got councils or even EPAs that are actually physically paying that 73.3 or their portion of that. But then you've actually then got the ratepayers that say, I want to go further and I actually will invest on top of that. So arguably, and that's just the willingness to pay to clean up and the cost of cleaning up, essentially it costs 200 or 190 or so million already, and that's without awareness or infrastructure. So it is a big issue. So if you look at how other countries have tackled this, some of you may be aware of the EU Plastics Directive. So in January there was a flurry of EU countries that started announcing that they were going to take action on charging tobacco companies in order to actually offset the cost of cigarette butt litter. It's very provisional, it's very early. They've essentially got a mandate to act and they have said that they will be taking action. A lot of them don't have baseline data. A lot of them don't understand how they can actually then charge the tobacco companies and what the policies are in place for that. But the intent is very clear. They are taking action and more countries will start taking action. Specifically, if we look at San Francisco, so in San Francisco, it was about 9 years ago, there was actually a very concerted and short-term effort, I believe it was 5 days, where they basically took a case to the highest court in San Francisco and suggested that tobacco companies paid 35 cents per packet of cigarettes sold. Based off the baseline data they collected, they were using the Literati app, but anything I'm sure could be done, where they actually then went into the council. Now tobacco said, firstly, it's wrong, and secondly, it's a tax. That actually at the highest level they said, no, it's not a tax, it's a litter abatement fee, and by the way, it's not 35 cents, it's 70. And from there's actually now been increases every year, and as of January 1st this year, that's $1.25 per pack, which is remitted quarterly from retailers that sell tobacco, and that's remitted to the Treasury via a simple paper form and a remittance advice. So that rudimentary model in itself is obviously giving hundreds of millions of dollars to the City of San Francisco to deal specifically with administrational costs and actually the cost of litter. If anyone's seen me speak over the last couple of years, these are essentially the same sort of slides, my little funky builds and everything like that. 9 billion, that's the estimate, that's the upper limit. I always say whether it's 1 billion, 8.9 billion or 4 billion, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't be in the ocean. It is a plastic. It makes its way into the ocean and it also pollutes our soil. It harms marine life. It damages ecosystems, vegetation and so on. Not to mention, of course, fires and bushfires. Now, funnily enough, and I'll pause briefly on cigarette butts if we actually talk about vaping, because last year I actually stood here and talked about the fact that no one had actually been considering the whole concept of vaping and what disposable vapes were doing to our environment. So very happy to announce last week the Federal Health Minister not only said he was taking action on banning disposable vapes, but he actually had a Health Minister in a conversation around finances cited because of the environmental impacts and the impact to landfill. So very happy that, and I say that the connection there because of the fire, because you had 1 million lithium batteries per week making their way into landfill, causing all sorts of fires. So the environment is definitely better off without disposable vapes in our ecosystem. If you decide to, or you need to continue to vape nicotine to get off cigarettes, that is still available, and you can do so from a pharmacy. So back to butts, poor little birds. When we're actually talking about calculating the cost of cigarette butt litter, as said, you've got your direct costs which you need to go through, so everything from your policy design. So if you actually have got a team that want to sit down and go through the policy implementation of something like a litter abatement fee, your dedicated infrastructure, and also it's got to be fit for purpose. I think Byron's great. There are 123 bins which are there and actually generally adjacent to bins, generally also where people smoke. I've seen so many different iterations of where bins are just put because that's where the other bin goes and maybe not where people smoke, or there's actually no dedicated infrastructure and people do the right thing and put it in the bin. It's a slogan. But obviously then the wind comes and blows it away. So you've got to make sure that your infrastructure is actually fit for purpose. Program management, awareness, including marketing, your clean-up events and anything to do with reporting costs as well. So there, I guess, your direct costs, and then you've got the willingness to pay. Like, what would you pay to recover the rest of what you haven't recovered through those ones? But then you've also got the shared costs, and these are important as well because these are not specifically linked to cigarette butt litter, but they are costs where I don't think anyone's thought too much about, if cigarette butts are actually 16% or 20% or 39% of my total litter, have you actually done a cost attribution to say, let's have a look at our litter enforcement officers, let's have a look at the cost of landfill, let's have a look at everything else in there. So they're the shared costs that can be shared across every other litter stream, but an appropriate percentage should actually be directed to cigarette butts given the percentage that they actually make up. So when we look at the elements that you do need to consider, and we've actually prepared essentially a view of this direct and indirect cost, and we've categorised it there. We are working with, if anyone's studied anything to do with tobacco litter or tobacco, you've probably come across the name Professor Thomas Novotny. So we're actually working with him on building this model out so that it will be available essentially as a web resource where you can type in all of your key elements. So this is like the cost, this is the direct and shared costs. And then there's almost this meeting in the middle, and this is not a specific model for Albury. I just used the Albury population demographics. But what we're looking to do is look at top down and bottom up and say, if you look at population and population estimates and those the amount of smoking and therefore those that are actually going to be littering, how many cigarette butts are going to be littered in there? If we don't have accurate baseline data, because it would almost be impossible to do, we can make some population estimates. Then when you do your bottom-up costing from your direct and your shared costs, what does it actually look like from a total cost perspective? And you might end up saying we've actually going to be generating 10 million or 100 million cigarette butts, which is going to be at an approximate cost of, let's call it 4 cents per cigarette stick, and that then will cover the true costs of direct and shared costs from dealing with this. So it's a model that, happy to work with any councils, and as said, we do the bulk of our work pro bono or share these resources as they become more readily available with more information in the back end so that you can just click and select those things that are readily available to you. There's potentially 3 ways to fund it, and you can go into subsets of all of these. There's the willingness to pay, and I say that it shouldn't necessarily come down to your ratepayer and your taxpayer to pay this, but people are willing to pay. So you do have that lever in itself. Just this week, obviously, you've had also notes of 5% increases on tobacco excise in the coming years, which will recover about $3.5 billion from eroded federal budget excise and duties which have been generated from here. There's there's $12.6 billion already generated. How good would 1% of that be towards environmental initiatives which would essentially cover the cost of this? Where's that generated from? It's generated from the users of the products via the producers of the products. Or something like the litter abatement fee, like the San Francisco model, where you could actually look to charge $1 per pack via retailers. It's not a tax. It's very important to realise that and to say that. It's a fee. It would require, obviously, lots of different city, state and federal intervention, but I believe that's the most viable way in order to do it. So ultimately the question is, are cigarette butts a single-use plastic? I've been asking this question rhetorically for a couple of years, and the answer is certainly yes, they are. when you actually look now at information around the World Health Organization last year came out and suggested that there is no evidence that provides health benefit to humans from having there, and there's clear evidence that it provides destruction to the environment. Just a week and a half ago, 10 days ago, the Belgian Superior Health Council provided a report to the Environment Minister in Belgium concurring after their studies, which said that plastic tobacco filters provide no health benefit and in fact can cause health harm as well as harming our environment. So certainly the position should very much be we should look to ban these things, but if we can't, how do we actually make sure that those that are using them and those that are creating them are the ones that are subject to the payments for it? So recommended next steps, calculate the cost of cigarette butt leather in your LGA. As said, happy to work with any LGAs, councils, NGOs on this topic. I'd suggest looking at things like litter abatement fees. Can it be done in your local council? Can it be done as an LGA association? Can it be done at a state or a federal level? Certainly advocacy around the banning of the actual filter as part of federal product stewardship initiatives, Minister's Priority List, Product Stewardship Centre of Excellence. The list goes on of all the different mechanisms that can be employed. And certainly from a New South Wales EPA, they've obviously got a fantastic suite of grants, and the next intake for the cigarette butt litter prevention is certainly something you should look to consider. So overall position is if we can't remove it, work out a way how to use it and make the industry pay for it. So unfortunately, I'm going to leave you with a few little sad ducks and those sort of same key messages. So $73.3 million it currently costs. We'd be willing to pay another nearly $120 million to get rid of the balance of it. We should look to things like litter abatement fees at $1.25 per pack to actually recover those costs and consider those direct and shared costs. We're on the bulk of the socials, not so active on TikTok and Snapchat, but certainly LinkedIn and Instagram, you can certainly find us there. Thank you very much. I'll be wearing a wig tonight, so you'll be able to find me, and thank you.
I'm intrigued, Shannon. The cigarette butt, the filter, has no positive impact? I thought it was there to get rid of the tar, or some of the tar.
Yeah, so the cigarette filters were, I guess, mass-scaled around about the 50s, and the filter, I suppose, in itself automatically conjures up an idea that it's filtering out all of these nasties. No, but basically 99% of filters now sold are cellulose acetate. If we think about why they were introduced, you had something this long, which was tobacco leaf, which is very, very expensive to farm. All of a sudden you've introduced plastic into that, so cigarettes became significantly cheaper. It also gave the opportunity to insert things like menthol capsules to make the smoker's experience better. So it was actually pretty much a trick by the tobacco industry, and yeah, you can now look. I think the question has actually been said, well, surely they provide benefits. Now the Superior Health Council has come out and said, well, actually, no, we've done the research and they don't.
That's fascinating. Thanks. Okay, we've got time for some questions. Are there any burning questions anyone would like to ask? Please, yes. If you could state your name and affiliation, please.
Yeah, James Walker, Councillor Clarence City, Tasmania. Sorry to hold everyone up. Sam, really thank you for your presentation. I look on envious from a Tasmanian perspective when I see New South Wales with the RID squads and how they've been collaborating on reducing illegal dumping. So we saw the Victorian trajectory, which is per capita down but quantity upwards. Is there any data comparing state by state how things are tracking?
Is it on? Yep. Unfortunately, no. And that was one of the drivers why in Victoria we started collecting this data. It's a very laborious, intensive process, speaking to every council. But it has to be done in Victoria, and I'm happy to work with anyone who wants to do it in any other state. So, yeah, I'd put the call out. If you want to do it, I'm happy to work with you to do it, because unfortunately the answer is no. Well, yeah, I guess I can speak to Elgate and other people to try and get that kicking over. And just as a follow-up then, I guess,
when you're doing this study, a council's reporting about the frustrations of they're getting the call, but it turns out it's on a state government property or a private property. Are some of those impairments where, like, you can actually have a spillage over multiple sites or on a border of multiple councils, slowing things down in the process?
Yes, so demarcation can be an issue, but one of the great things about the survey is we're able to identify a bit more about those demarcation issues, and we've held workshops in the past specifically to target that, so bringing the right people together into the room and helping them to collaborate. It's been a really empowering part of the survey. So yes, it's an issue, but the survey empowers you to overcome it more readily.
Up the back there.
Hi, Antonia from Maroondah Council down in Victoria. My question's for Brodie. I was just curious about the purchasing of the domain data. And apologies if I missed this, but I understand you're using that for access to the real estate information. Were you also getting tenant details through that data set, or getting that from the real estate? Any insights there would be great.
Yes, so I get 2 sets of data from them. I get information about the listings that have changed, so nothing personal about, you moved in on the 5th of whatever. I get information that says Unit 5 was listed for rent on the 1st of the month and taken down 2 weeks later. So we kind of run on that assumption that if you take a listing down, it probably means that you found a tenant. And then with that, we get the information of who made that listing and which estate agent they were from. So I just have a data sharing agreement with Domain. They sell that to me for $500 a month. They send me a spreadsheet with my, requested information. We have about 1,400 rentals to change over each month, so it's a pretty big data set for your $500. So seems cost effective for us, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, please. I'll try.
I just want to understand, you've got a booking system, but then you're also saying with some of the social housing, you were giving them dates. So were they pre-booking, or were you pre-booking on their behalf for certain ones?
Yes, so basically we found that our social housing tenancy managers aren't booking the cleanups in to use the full allocation. They're busy, there's not enough of them for the number, so they just don't. So to help them and ensure that those residents actually have access to the system, we book them in for them with engagement with the tenancy officer saying, I'm going to do this, are you happy with that? And they go, yes, please, and quickly hang up and move on to whatever else they're doing. For the rest of our apartment blocks, we have the strata managers book on their behalf, and then they can, on their own behalf of their own buildings, and then they can pick their dates throughout the year to suit the needs of their buildings. But just to make it as simple as possible for the housing ones, we've done it every 2 months on the first Tuesday, so it's really consistent and easy.
So I assume then that when you book in, there are requirements that can't be put out. It has to be put out at a certain time and things like that. So with the social housing ones, did that then cause problems because they go, oh, it's going to be picked up in a week and a half, I'm just going to put it out now?
Yep, so I've actually got a copy with me. We have out too early stickers. So our illegal dumping officer does a patrol of the estate once a week. So it's 8 weeks between each cleanup. 6 of those weeks she does enforcement activities, it's illegal, get it off the curb kind of thing. In the weeks leading up to the cleanup, we switched to you almost did the right thing, but you were too soon message. And so instead of putting on our big, scary, you'll be fined messages, we have this item was put out too early messaging. And that seems to be working. They're getting more and more compliant over the year.
And that person's not part of the squad? Sorry, I'm the illegal dumping coordinator for the Southern Region Waste Program, so that's why I'm...
No, that's all right.
So were they part of the squad, or they were internal from you guys?
So we have 2 illegal dumping officers as part of our resource recovery team. So they're separate to the RID squad and separate to our council compliance team. Mm-hmm. They are purely for illegal dumping.
Good work. I'll leave it at that. Anyone else?
Yes.
Karen Rudkin from North East Waste. I just had a couple of questions, 2 short questions, one for Sam and one for Zoe. So for Sam, I know you've only collected data over, I think you said 3 years, but have you seen any change in the profile of the offenders in that time, or is it perhaps too early to say?
Oh no, you've caught us out. We have collected data on offender profiles for the last 2 years, not 3.
Right.
And the only one, so we introduced the rogue commercial operator this year. Apart from that, everything was the same. So it matches that trend in Victoria that we're seeing a move towards commercial waste issues. Yep.
Good, thanks. And the question for Zoe was just, with all the resources you did, because of your high number of international tourists and visitors, did you do any of the resources in other languages? Is that necessary, or is that a possible option for the future?
No, we haven't, but I think that was because the focus at that point in time was on domestic tourists, because those were the visitors that we were getting to the area during the pandemic. But that's not to say, like, we had subtitles on all of the videos. That's not to say that we couldn't then adjust that it could have subtitles in other languages. But in saying that, I feel that our tourism demographic, there's no particular, I can't think of key languages that you would sort of focus on that you try and target. It's quite a mixture, and a lot of people will have at least some sort of base language of English. But yeah,
and
definitely something to think
well.
about.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Great presentations, everybody. Thank you.
Just one for Sam. Just wondering who funds where?
So, apologies. The funding for the network is primarily through fee-for-service training. So when we said we do training, a lot of that can be bespoke training that an organisation comes to us and we'll completely tailor a course for them. When it comes to those large member training days, that is sponsored by the regulatory authority and any other organisation that wants to be on board. That's primarily how we're funded.
Zoe, I've got a question for you. Did you get any feedback with all the promotional material you've been putting out there? Were you able to measure reductions in litter?
Reductions in litter, absolutely, but whether we can attribute that directly to those educational resources, unfortunately, no, and that's definitely an ongoing challenge, is how do we measure behaviour change, and one of the key issues is we were going to look at surveys to do that, but then we weren't allowed in the airport lounge, and yeah, it wasn't something that people were that engaged with that they'd want to actually pick up a hard copy or do anything because they've just arrived somewhere and they're on their holiday. So, no, we didn't evaluate those particular messages and their effect. You
can look at, the beach and do litter counts on the beach, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did achieve the 40% reduction in litter volume throughout the project. So we saw that, and hopefully that can be attributed to those resources, but I can't say that the data definitely supports that.
Okay. Any other questions? Yep.
My question's for Shannon. Could you elaborate a bit more on the 73 million, the first number you put on the slides?
So this is get it up just in case this is a figure that was put out by WWF with a report commissioned through Equilibrium, and that essentially covers the predominant costs of the clean-up activities. So some of the admin costs, some of the project costs, some of the actual direct clean-up costs from organisations, associations, cost of mechanical sweeping dedicated to that, infrastructure and that sort of thing. So and then I guess the what's left on the ground is where the other figure of the 117 East Coast kind of comes in, that if it's still there after all that cost has actually gone into there, what are people actually going to then pay to remove the balance of it? Sorry, yeah, it's absolutely low. It's incredibly low, yeah. And funnily enough, there's one of the groups that affiliations that we're engaged with. They actually did start creating this website, and I went to it, and it says the cost of litter in Australia for cigarette butt litter is $5 million. And I said, there's no way that I can, promote that or share that link until it's actually updated to at least reflect a very small baseline number. It's got to be well over $100 million, and that's why I think that sort of that 1% target of $128 million into environmental initiatives, I think would largely solve the problem. Considering there's $12.8 billion worth of consolidated revenue, it shouldn't be too hard.
Good. Any other questions? If not, we'll call it quits. Everyone gets an early mark, get changed for dinner.